What if I told you that you could drink a gallon of water every single day and still experience symptoms that feel like dehydration? Not necessarily because you're not drinking enough water, but because hydration is about more than just the amount of water you pour into your body. The water has to be absorbed, retained in the right compartments, balanced with electrolytes, and ultimately support the function of your cells. So today, I'm going to explain the difference between simply drinking water and actually supporting cellular hydration. We'll talk about why sodium alone isn't the whole story, how potassium and magnesium help to maintain cellular function, why your mitochondria care about hydration, and whether or not your electrolyte powder is actually appropriate for you. And stay with me because later in the video, I'm going to explain who should be very careful with potassium containing electrolytes. But before we dive in, one very important disclaimer. While I am a naturopathic doctor, I'm not your doctor. This video is for educational purposes only, and it's not meant to diagnose or treat any of the conditions that you're dealing with today. It's very important to identify that symptoms like fatigue, dizziness, headaches, palpitations, and weakness might have many other causes other than hydration. So anyone with persistent symptoms like vomiting or diarrhea, severe weakness, any heart symptoms, or reduced urination should seek appropriate medical care. I don't necessarily think it's wise to substantially increase your sodium, potassium, or even your magnesium without consulting with your medical provider first to make sure that those changes are best for you. So first, I think we have to start with what cellular hydration actually means. Cellular hydration is the intake of fluid getting into your intestines, your GI tract, getting pulled into your bloodstream and drawn to the extracellular fluid space, where it can then enter inside of the cell. So that's the quick breakdown. Those areas or those compartments help to highlight that water doesn't just sit in one space in your body. It actually needs to be moved around and traveled from one place to the next in order for it to get inside of your cells to do the job that it needs to do. Now, that inside of the cell space, we call that the intracellular fluid space. That's one of the most important spaces, but all of the other spaces need to have their electrolytes and components that belong in them balanced in order for those transports to occur adequately to keep you properly hydrated. Now, another important point. Drinking water isn't going to be the same as solving every hydration problem. This is because there's a lot of different ways that you can have water imbalances. You may be drinking enough water, but if you're losing lots of water from sweat or a fever, maybe diarrhea, that could be a pretty big hindrance to the amount of fluids that you're adding into the system. Also, adding in plain water might not automatically replace any of the electrolytes you lose during sweating or from illness. And some of those big heavy hitter electrolytes are sodium, potassium, or magnesium, but there are some other components to the fluid compartments that help to maintain fluid balance as well. It's also important to note that drinking lots of plain water can also dilute the sodium that's in your blood, making the situations not completely harmless. So just adding in more water might not be the best situation for you. At least more plain water might not be the best situation because it can come with some risks. So I think one of the most important things that you have to ask yourself, is the water issue a low intake concern? Is it from an excess in fluid loss? Is there a low blood volume concern? Or maybe there's some electrolyte disturbances or something completely unrelated to hydration altogether. It's important to really figure out what's going on with your hydration and your fluid levels before just trying to throw in some quick fix that you heard about online. Now, I've had some patients that I've worked with before that are people that work with their hands, the classic blue collar, in the summer times, they're working outside in the sun and it's hot. And they tell me there's no way they could be dehydrated. They have all the classic symptoms, headaches, dizziness, muscle cramps. And again, when we check their labs, it shows that there's signs of dehydration popping up there, but they promise me that they're drinking tons of water. Those are very classic systems where some of that dehydration might be related to not replenishing those fluids with the right kinds of water, right? So not having the balance of electrolytes that are necessary to help in those unique cases. So I mentioned this briefly. There are several different fluid compartments or places where fluids can hide in your body that aren't just related to drinking the water and it just sitting in one space in your body. We have your blood volume and we have the intracellular function. So again, that fluid that's inside of the cells. Now, these are two completely different locations and can come with almost completely different symptoms in the way that they present themselves. I've had a patient that I worked with that was having what we would consider a volume depletion due to vomiting and diarrhea. Those symptoms would present completely different. Again, those people would present a bit more acutely ill and maybe feel a little bit more drained and tired. But again, some of the individuals that have concerns with an intracellular fluid imbalance, they're going to be dealing with lots of fatigue and maybe some issues with poor sleep. Sometimes anemia or thyroid concerns may pop up. And so again, maybe not presenting as acutely ill, but feeling more chronically drained. And so we talk about fatigue quite a bit on this channel, and dehydration can be one of those primary drivers of this, particularly that intracellular dehydration. So it's important to make sure that we get that evaluated for you. So sodium alone isn't the whole story, but sodium does get a lot of attention, sometimes for good and sometimes for bad. One of the primary things with sodium in a lot of the conversations is a complete sodium removal. Certain groups, again, typically that are targeted for this are individuals that have hypertension or higher blood pressure. There's a lot of conversations about complete removal of sodium in these individuals. That can be risky. And again, sodium isn't really the enemy, but it really shouldn't be completely removed from the hydration conversation as well. Sodium does help to maintain that fluid volume outside of the cells. And so it can help with how your nerves function and how your muscles function. It also can help to replace some of the sweat-related fluid losses. But potassium is really the all-star, one of the ones that I talk about quite a bit with a lot of my patients, because it really helps to maintain that internal cellular function and internal cell volume. And so having that potassium present in the system is very important because we want to make sure that there's a balance between the electrolytes so that you don't have the sodium trapping the fluids outside of the cell. You want to make sure that you have enough of a balance between sodium and potassium so that the fluids can move across the gradient in the way that they're supposed to, again, between the inside of the cell and the outside of the cell. If you have lots of sodium outside of the cell, you may create some imbalances there that can result in, again, a blockage on the way that fluids move throughout the body. Now, I don't necessarily think it's a good idea for everyone to start taking high dose potassium because there are some risks with that. Typically, a lot of the products that are available on the market for electrolytes are sodium based. Again, they're usually from salts, so sodium chloride. You're going to get a lot more increase in those sodium levels with those products. That could be helpful, again, if you're sweating a lot. So if you're doing a lot of gym work, replacing the sodium could be very helpful. But if you're not really doing that much of the gym work, so if you're more of a sedentary person, drinking tons and tons of those electrolyte packets every day could result in some concerns where, again, you're spiking those sodium levels and not necessarily getting in enough potassium. So another electrolyte or mineral that I often see that's completely missed from a lot of this conversation is magnesium. So magnesium is really important in helping the way that electrons are moved through the electron transport chain to produce cellular energy. So the primary conversation there is as cellular energy as ATP. So magnesium is very important for the production of that. And so making sure that there's enough magnesium in the environment is going to be very helpful. It's going to help the muscles function well. It's going to help nerve signaling. And not having enough magnesium as an electrolyte can result in some problems as well. So instead of just primarily focusing on a sodium-only electrolyte, making sure that there's enough sodium, magnesium, and potassium could be extremely beneficial just because of the way that your body utilizes all of these nutrients in energy production to help combat fatigue and helping to keep those fluid compartments balanced so that nutrients can move in and out of the cell adequately. So sometimes I have people come in and they ask me how being dehydrated could be related to fatigue. And, there's a big deal there because the mitochondria really care about fluid balance and electrolyte balance. Your mitochondria is what produces that cellular energy, and it primarily functions with a balanced sodium-potassium enzyme or a pump that keeps those electrical gradients balanced so that your body can generate that energy. When you lose those electrolytes, it's difficult for your mitochondria to do the job of generating that cellular energy to make sure that everything works well. So poor nutrition, illness, any big oxidative stress in your body, thyroid dysfunctions, all of those can impair energy production. But hydration is a major contributor to energy balance because, again, your mitochondria needs those fluids and it needs those electrolytes to keep that system running. I had several patients before that presented with fatigue and poor diet intake, low protein, not enough minerals, not drinking enough water, and fixing all of those other major areas, but not necessarily getting to the water due to challenges with work, maybe needing to sit for a long period of time. See this a lot with teachers and people who drive for a living, but not able to really get that water intake for fear of having to run to the bathroom often and still seeing some issues. But once we're able to actually address that hydration element, everything ties together and the system starts to improve with that energy production. All right, so if you've made it this far, you may be thinking, all right, I drink plenty of water, but I still have headaches, fatigue, cramps, or even brain fog. Does that mean that my cells are dehydrated? And not necessarily. And this is a really important distinction. Those symptoms may involve fluid balance, but they can come from anemia, blood sugar challenges, thyroid dysfunction, medications, poor sleep, nutrient deficiencies, low blood pressure, infections, or many other types of medical problems. The goal of this video isn't to label every single symptom as dehydration. The goal is to stop assuming that drinking more plain water or buying the saltiest electrolyte powder available on the market is always going to be the correct answer. So let's talk about some of the symptoms that should make you look at the entire pattern rather than just a one standoff concern. Now, these are some of the most common symptoms associated with poor hydration or electrolyte imbalance. Real common ones are going to include thirst, dry mouth, some darker urine. Sometimes you'll see some reduced urination, some fatigue and headaches, as well as some lightheadedness or poor heat tolerance. Electrolyte abnormalities can contribute to some muscle cramps and weakness, as well as changes in exercise performance and even heart rhythm symptoms. A real common one that I see in my clinical practice is a lot of orthostatic dizziness, so changing in position, so going from laying to sitting or from sitting to standing. That shifting change can sometimes create some lightheadedness when you shift, and that's usually related to low blood volume. Can happen with some medications, but usually it's the medications that are altering your blood pressure or trying to change your blood volume by having you urinate a bit more with more diuresis, or sometimes constipation. So constipation can also get a little bit worse if fluid levels are inadequate. So you may see some more constipation show up. Palpitations, again, heart or chest concerns. Most of these do require some medical evaluation. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend self-treatment with electrolytes in these cases. But if you do have some persistent dizziness, some chest pain, a lot of weakness, it could be worth considering, again, that you're maybe a bit more dehydrated. I've seen a lot of times, a lot of cases with individuals that have recurring dizziness and nausea, trying a lot of different electrolyte powders with their medications and not really seeing any changes as a result of that because the medications that they were on were actually the primary drivers of causing some of those symptoms. So again, just trying to replace something while a medication might be an underlying cause, you may not see any improvements with it and feel that I'm taking this for no reason, it didn't work. It's probably because there could be something else going on behind the scenes, and why it's very important to have a conversation with your healthcare providers so that they can go over everything that you're taking, whatever supplements that you might be on that could be countering or even working against the medications to figure out if there's a better fit for you. Now, here's some common hydration mistakes that I see all the time in my clinical practice. If you're drinking only plain water after any prolonged physical activity, lots of sweating, endurance exercises, or even working outside for a long period of time with significant heat exposure, these could all result in worsening hydration. You may want to also add in there some vomiting and diarrhea because you do lose some fluids from those areas. One of the first things that people really look out for are the big signs of dehydration, which would be like a headache or an energy crash. People look at those and think those are the only signs of dehydration, but there could be some other things that are going to really show up first before any of those other things. So you want to just keep an eye out for, are you doing any of these types of activities? Again, exercise, lots of sweating, being outside in the heat. It's going to be worth just replenishing those nutrients before getting to that really end stage dehydration with lots of headaches and feeling like you're going to crash. Typically, I do see some individuals using lots of electrolyte packets without actually keeping an eye on the daily values, especially ones that are really high in sodium, potassium, magnesium, and even sugars. We really want to take a look at the daily intake levels on those packets because you may be going way above what you should be having, which could be very risky. A lot of these nutrients, a lot of these minerals shouldn't be taken in very high doses. Sodium can cause lots of problems in high doses, again, particularly if you have hypertension. Potassium can cause life-threatening consequences if you're taking tons of potassium daily. And magnesium could cause some diarrhea if you take it in higher doses, which could worsen your hydration status. And obviously, sugar in high doses can contribute to diabetes and poor sugar balance over time, and also worsening your hydration status because now you have more sugar in your blood, which can contribute to dehydration. One of the main things there is, again, outside of what you could do with electrolytes, is also just eating a poor diet that's rich in highly processed foods. These processed foods do tend to have a lot of sodium in them, and they're low in some of those other essential nutrients like potassium, magnesium, and just it throws the entire balance off, even proteins. Those are really important for making sure that your fluids are balanced. So trying to correct fatigue, for example, with just water and minerals, while ignoring sleep and blood sugar, alcohol intake, even medications that you're taking to deal with any underlying medical conditions, could be a real big gap in your care and should be strongly considered. I've seen several patients before that are really having a very poor diet. They basically have no fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, beans, nothing, poor protein intake, and are trying to replenish their nutrient levels or replenish their hydration with just the electrolyte packets alone, and that rarely ever works out in their favor. And so it's important to be able to acknowledge that diet and lifestyle modifications are going to work hand in hand here. So before we move into the food and supplement strategies, if this is helping you to understand hydration in a completely different way, take a second to hit that like button. This helps YouTube share the video with more people who are drinking more and more water, but not necessarily understanding why they still feel tired, foggy, or poorly recovered. And subscribe if you want more videos where I break down fatigue, electrolytes, mitochondrial function, functional labs, and nutrition in a practical and medically responsible way. So let's talk about how to better build out your hydration from a food-first perspective. One of my go-tos is always focusing on food first. We want to really build the mineral foundation based off of the foods that you're eating, or maybe foods that you aren't eating. And incorporating those into the diet is going to make a really big change rather than just looking at the supplement approach. There are lots of potassium-rich foods. Most people think of bananas first, but there are many others like beans, potatoes, squash, and lentils. Dark green leafies also can fall into that category as well, and a whole host of other fruits and vegetables. So it's going to be really important to incorporate more of those potassium-rich foods into the diet. Again, not going particularly above and beyond, but just making sure that you're having a well-balanced whole food diet, because that could really move the needle in a positive direction. Speaking of other nutrients or minerals that are going to be very helpful, we mentioned magnesium. Lots of magnesium-rich options in terms of those foods, like pumpkin seeds, nuts and beans, leafy greens as well, whole grains, and again, a whole host of other minimally processed whole foods is really going to move the needle in your benefit in the long run. So it's really important to, again, just look at a whole food, minimally processed diet. Trying to get more of those in is going to be very helpful, because it's also going to put a shift towards making sure you're getting enough protein, because protein's super important in the fluid hydration balance as well. It's going to help with tissue repair. It's going to help your body build those enzymes that are necessary to run these systems. It's going to help to create the transport proteins, which can help to keep fluids balanced in the system. And so the hydration component of your health shouldn't be separated from the other basic nutritional needs that you're going to be working on. Another really big kind of like sneak in that you can add in is a good quality coconut water. Coconut water, it's a natural electrolyte, has potassium and carbohydrates with a little bit of sugar. It doesn't necessarily contain enough sodium for most individuals who are heavily sweating. So it's not a quick fix for everyone, but it's something that could be considered for individuals that need more of that potassium benefit. The next important thing here is how you want to evaluate an electrolyte product. This is going to be really important because you want to first start out what the intended point of the electrolyte product is for. Is this something that you plan to use for everyday hydration? Is it to replace fluids after a heavy exercise or heavy sweating? Or is it just for a short-term illness-related fluid losses? These are all going to be very important to make sure that you're getting exactly what you need out of the product. And in order to do that, you have to first check what the sodium levels are like, the potassium, magnesium, and even carbohydrates that are added in to the product, and not just what it's saying on the front of the label. Higher sodium products are typically going to be better suited for individuals that are sweating a lot more. So if you're an endurance athlete or you've experienced a tremendous amount of gastrointestinal fluid loss, so this could be either through diarrhea or vomiting, you may need a little bit more of that sodium-based product to replace this issue. Now, people who need a little bit more potassium, that's going to be mostly everybody else that's going to fall into that category, but you shouldn't necessarily treat potassium-containing products as safer than the sodium-containing products because potassium does carry a lot more risk, particularly at those higher doses. It can create some cardiovascular concerns. So you want to be mindful about that in the long run. Now, sugar isn't necessarily need to be added to a lot of these formulas. You do see it in there. Glucose can play a role in the way that sodium is moved through the intestinal tract. And a lot of sports drinks do add it in as a part of their formula. But I don't typically recommend sugar as a part of those formulas for everyone, and it can be excluded in some instances. But if you feel, again, like you're running a little bit lower in blood sugar after an exercise, it doesn't necessarily hurt to have a formula that has a little bit of sugar in there to help to improve it. The three big groups that I see in my clinical practice are individuals that are sweating a lot. So again, the people who are working outside in the heat, the people who are in the gym, working really hard in the gym, they're typically going to need a sodium-based electrolyte formula to help to replace some of the salt that's lost in the sweat. Individuals that need more of a lower electrolyte, maybe more sedentary, but feel a little dehydrated, they can sometimes benefit more from a potassium-based formula, maybe not a sodium chloride, potentially a potassium bicarbonate formula that isn't, again, as high in salts, but can allow some of those fluids to be absorbed so that fluids can get into the cell. And more specific cases dealing with an illness, lots of diarrhea or vomiting, those individuals may benefit from kind of a lower electrolyte, maybe a lower salt formula, but still getting some more of those sodium chloride ions in there as well to help to absorb some of those fluids that they're losing as a result of that illness. Now, I mentioned some cases before where you may want to be careful with potassium, but there are some other individuals who want to be extra careful with potassium as well, particularly those individuals who are taking a potassium-sparing diuretic, one like spironolactone or amiloride. These help your body to retain potassium and can already go to pretty high levels as a result of those medications. And so if you add in more potassium by using an electrolyte, it can cause your potassium levels to get very high. Most people are already aware of this because their doctors pretty much warn them. But other types of heart health medications, like ACE inhibitors or the angiotensin receptor blocker medications, they can also block how much potassium your body is losing through the kidneys, making your potassium levels rise as well. So you want to be careful in those cases. It's going to be important to have a conversation with your doctor if you're taking any diuretic medications, heart failure medications, blood pressure medications. Any of those can interact with sodium and potassium, and in some cases even magnesium, and how your body is balancing those electrolytes out. So it's not a good idea to just go and start adding those electrolytes back in while on those medications. Can result in some problems. So you do need to keep an eye on it. You should be having regular blood tests to make sure that your levels are where they're supposed to be, and so that you can replace those nutrient levels when they drop too low on the blood test or when they're getting too close to being low. Then you can add in those missing electrolytes under the guidance of your care provider. But you shouldn't just try and add them in because it could result in some dangerous elevations in some of those levels. So the most important thing is to build out a practical hydration framework. You don't want to only ask, how much water am I drinking? You really want to ask, what am I losing? And what am I replacing? What am I getting from my diet? Is the hydration the actual cause of the symptoms that I'm dealing with? Or am I just guessing? And so the blood work and the blood tests, even some urine tests, can be pretty helpful at identifying where some of those gaps are. But there could be a lot of other things that are missing as well. A good healthy diet, making sure that you're hydrating well with that diet, lots of fruits and vegetables, so a whole food based diet, making sure that you're getting a wide variety of different proteins as well, so that way your body can build all of those other essential components that maintain your fluid volume as well, that are based off of proteins, to make sure that you're getting everything that you ultimately need. Again, rather than guessing, having a good baseline set of laboratory workups could be very helpful, particularly before trying to replace any potassium or even sodium that might be missing from your diet. So just make sure that you get those workups done before throwing in sodium and potassium. So drinking water is essential, but drinking more water is not the universal answer to fatigue, brain fog, cramps, dizziness, or even poor recovery. Sodium plays a humongous role in the extracellular fluid, and potassium plays a big role in the intracellular fluid. Magnesium helps to make your body be able to produce energy adequately, and the kidneys regulate the entire system. So we find that everything needs to be in balance, and that's the most important thing. You'll hear me say that often. Balance is going to be very important, and food should really be at the foundation for most individuals, particularly when you're talking about your mineral needs. Supplements could be helpful to solve this very specific problem, but don't necessarily just follow trends that might show up on the internet. You really want to try to avoid self-treating and get the right tests to see where the gaps might be showing up before starting out with any specific electrolyte powders. Hydration isn't about just flooding your body with tons of water. It's about giving your body the fluids, the minerals, the nutrition, and the metabolic support that it needs in order to regulate those fluids or that water properly. So let me know in the comments, have you ever increased your water intake and still felt completely dehydrated? And I'd love to know what topic I should break down next. Do you want me to chat about maybe the sodium potassium pump a little more, magnesium and fatigue, how those are related, maybe some more about potassium rich foods? Or do you want to know more about how to pick an electrolyte powder? Let me know down in the comments. But just subscribe too, because this is just the beginning of a larger conversation that I'm going to be doing on cellular energy, mineral balance, fatigue, and mitochondrial health. So follow along.